Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this video I'm going to talk about the new Wacom One which Wacom kindly sent to me, and I'm also going to give you a bit of an insight into my digital illustration process. So here's the box. Yeah, I'm only going to talk a little bit about the specifications of this particular product. You can find plenty of information out there on the internet, but for now I'm going to kind of give just a bit of information, and then we're going to get right ahead and just go into the digital illustration stuff and have some fun. Here it is. I've had so much fun playing around with it and getting used to it, so yeah, I just want to say thanks again to Wacom for sending this through to me. The screen itself is 13.3 inches, so it's a really nice size. There are also these really handy legs that fold out, so you can have it slightly tilted. I find it really useful because you're not craning your neck over the display, you've got it at a nice angle to work on. It also comes with the Wacom pen. It's battery free and cordless, and there's also this useful pen holder to keep your pen safe when you're not using it. This device doesn't have a battery or a computer, so it's essentially a monitor, and it does need plugging into a power source, and it'll need connecting to a laptop, a desktop PC, or certain Android devices using the HDMI and USB cables that come with it. I have mine set up with my MacBook Pro, and I'm using Adobe Photoshop for the illustration. Most of my digital illustration work starts as a sketch or a doodle in my sketchbook or on a scrap piece of paper, and then that kind of sits around until I decide that I want to work on it. For example, with this lighthouse and whale sketch, it's been in my sketchbook for about a year, but I decided I wanted to turn it into a coloured illustration. I then usually scan or take a photo and import it into Photoshop, but with this one I went ahead and just drew it straight into Photoshop as a rough sketch. I felt like there was something kind of missing, so I tried adding another whale, just played around with the composition for a bit, but again, something didn't sit quite right, so I worked on it some more, and then I finally came up with this one, which is a very, very rough sketch of 3 whales circling around a lighthouse. And yeah, that's the composition that I decided to go with in the end. So I use the brush sets by Kyle T. Webster in Photoshop, and I love using the gouache brushes, they're my favourite. I just love the textures and the depth they bring to the piece. After the rough sketch, I like to go in and refine the shapes and bring in some detail. So this is what I end up with. I have a nice clean sketch that for me really gives me an idea of what the final piece will look like. And when that's ready, I like to start figuring out my colour palette. So for this piece I wanted it to resemble another illustration that I did, 2 white wolves in the sky. And I wanted to create another magical, sort of dreamy looking illustration. So I used the eyedropper tool to sample the colours from that illustration to use in this one. When I'm ready, I just change the sketch layer to multiply, and then I start to really loosely block in the colour beneath it. That's usually quite a quick part of the process, but again it just really helps me visualise the final piece, and it helps motivate me, I think, because then I know, okay, it's gonna look like this, I can see it now, so I know I can do it. But like I said, I don't always do this step. I just think it's quite helpful when it's a piece that's a bit more complicated. Yeah, it's like a guide that I can refer back to. And then I start on the main illustration. I usually begin with my background and just block in the main shapes, using my sketch and colour rough for reference. whilst I carry on with that, I'd just like to bring it back to the Wacom One and how it is to work on. First of all, I should probably mention that this device is not touchscreen. You simply use the pen that comes with it. The display has a full HD screen that's 1920 by 1080 pixels, and there is a matte anti-glare film on the display, which is quite a nice touch because it doesn't feel like you're drawing straight onto glass. It almost mimics paper, quite useful for people moving from traditional art to digital art because there is that familiarity. The anti-glare screen is a great feature because fingerprints aren't really an issue and you also have some grip when you're drawing. Though I have found that the screen is quite difficult to see in direct sunlight, but other than that, drawing on the Wacom One is a comfortable experience. I really do think the Wacom One is a great device at entry level, or at any level really. It's fantastic for anyone moving from traditional art into the digital art realm, but also for those of you who want to try digital art for the first time. When illustrating in Photoshop, I highly recommend keeping those layers in organized folders. So for this illustration, I had a separate folder for my background layers, my lighthouse layers, my whale layers, and my final details. It's a useful way of tracking what you've done and returning to layers that you might want to edit later on. I like to play around with the opacity of the brushes that I'm using to create a variety of textures on the different elements that I'm working on. And you can see that happening with the clouds here. Finally, I'm starting on the whales. Again, I just go in and draw the shapes, then fill those in. And once I'm happy with their positioning, their size, I start with the details. Here I'm using a variety of spatter brushes by Kyle, and I'm using them at a lower opacity to create the stars and the mist effect around the whales. And then I go in with my usual gouache brush and I draw some tiny stars and particles. really wanted to play with the idea of the ocean colliding with the sky, so I drew these tiny fish details and bird details to really play on that. And honestly, I really loved how that turned out. When I get towards the end of an illustration, the last thing I often do is create some adjustment layers, and this is when I make any amendments or adjustments to the colours, the brightness, the saturation of my illustration. So you'll notice with this piece I actually increased the saturation slightly and enhanced the blues as well. And there we have it, here's the final illustration. So yeah, I hope you found that this was useful. Thanks again to Wacom, and thank you all for watching. Take care.